Federal Councillor Karin Keller-Sutter, Professor Manuel Ammann, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great honor and even greater pleasure for me to open this year's symposium, the 53rd St. Gallen Symposium. As Manuel Ammann mentioned, I studied at the University of St. Gallen over 20 years ago. I wrote exams here, and I received my degree on this stage. Actually, I think it was over there. I learned things here that are still useful for me as a journalist and editor-in-chief at the Süddeutsche Zeitung. And I made friends for life here. Some of them are sitting in the hall just right now. Much of my delight. In short, it was a good time. It was also a good time from a global perspective. The Cold War was over. Francis Fukuyama argued that democracy and a free market economy would soon prevail everywhere. I wrote my diploma thesis on globalization and argued with other students about whether Samuel P. Huntington was right or wrong with his The Clash of Civilizations. You all know times have changed since then. We have known, at least since the terrible Russian war of aggression in Ukraine, peace and democracy cannot be taken for granted. They have to be fought for again and again. Where wars are fought over land, free trade and multilateralism can no longer be taken for granted too. We are experiencing a new phase of protectionism. This all leads to new trade barriers, disrupted supply chains, higher prices. This all leads to scarcity. Confronting scarcity, the leadership team of the St. Gallen Symposium chose the title of this year's meeting wisely. Today, we are confronting with multiple scarcities, from natural resources and biodiversity to geopolitical disruption, skilled workforce. The idea of this year's St. Gallen Symposium is to explore those different scarcities, defining the most pressing one and finding solutions. Our traditional growth-oriented economic model has long relied on the assumption of abundant resources. However, in recent years, businesses, governments, and individuals have faced increasing scarcities across various dimensions: labor shortage, rising interest rates, environmental degradation, disrupted supply chains, and energy shortages. Looking ahead, long-term trends such as climate change, demographic aging, geopolitical shifts signal a fundamental shift from abundance to scarcity in our economy. Towards a new area of protracted scarcity is the title of the opening session of this year's symposium. Before I open the first panel, I'm very pleased to announce the first keynote speaker at this year's symposium, Federal Councillor Karin Keller-Sutter. Karin Keller-Sutter, yes, you can, if you want. Just a few remarks. Karin Keller-Sutter was elected to the Swiss Federal Council in 2018 and assumed the role of head of the Federal Department of Finance in 2023. Prior to her current position, she served as the head of the Federal Department of Justice and Police in Switzerland from 2019 to 2022. Dear Karin Keller-Sutter, I'm delighted that you are here today. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much for your introduction. Well, dear Chair of the Board of Trustees, dear President of the University, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, I would like to thank the University of St. Gallen for the invitation and the possibility to speak to you today, and I'm quite happy that I have apparently chosen nearly the right color for my appearance today. Now, first, let me underline that many alumni of the University of St. Gallen contribute to the success of Switzerland daily in the private sector as well as in the public sector. This also includes my department, the Department of Finance. The fact that we are meeting here today for the 53rd St. Gallen Symposium shows a long-term commitment to cross-generational dialogue. I have learned that this dialogue follows the vision of leading with the next generation in mind. Rest assured that this is exactly what I aim for as a finance minister. However, this task is not getting any better and easier. Over the last 4 years, we have had to face major external shocks with the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine. We are also witnessing a surge in the conflict in the Middle East, following the atrocious terror attacks of Hamas against peaceful Israeli citizens. We see the tensions surrounding Taiwan lingering, and as if all that were not enough, we are confronted with persisting serious and complex changes, such as those relating to natural resources and climate change. And as I already pointed out 3 years ago here in St. Gallen, we have to cope with liberal doctrines coming increasingly under pressure. Such gloomy scenarios stand in sharp contrast to the economic order built after the Second World War, based on social market economy and free trade. In particular, they differ from the very optimistic expectations after the Cold War regarding the final breakthrough of liberal democratic principles based on the rule of law. This system, which has created tremendous wealth through the international division of labor, fundamentally requires certainty and trust in order to work. However, the fragmentation of value chains along political lines and the challenges to multilateral fora make us question many assumptions that we have perhaps taken for granted, including the affluence of our society. Besides the human tragedy of war, these growing tensions have one common consequence: they tend to increase costs economically and decrease efficiency. Both adversely affect the availability of raw materials and goods and services. The prospect of facing episodes of scarcity, even in developed countries, such as those we witnessed during the global economic crisis in the 1970s, has once again become plausible. The vision of labor and efficiency seem to be concepts far away from human woes. They aren't. They've led to economic prosperity from which billions of people around the world have benefited. Less economic prosperity means less wealth, which is of course far from trivial. It may have direct political as well as social consequences, making markets, societies, and individual lives less stable. Dealing with such instabilities is a political reality that we need to acknowledge and address. Switzerland's wealth and quality of life are still very high. They depend largely on the country's openness to the world economy and de facto on conditions that we cannot determine on our own. But the good news is that there are aspects we can address. The Swiss economic success is also based on cultural and political factors, such as entrepreneurial spirit and commitment, individual freedom, democratic principles, and the rule of law. Both the private and public sector carry responsibility. For the public sector, sound fiscal and budgetary policies are key, especially when keeping future generations in mind. Let me emphasize, this should not be misunderstood as a plea for a weak state. Quite the opposite. As a classical liberal, I am an advocate for a strong state, and a sound, sustainable fiscal policy is at the very core of its strength. It ensures the state's responsibility to act and invest in the interests of the citizens and their physical, economic, and social security in both the short and the long term. In these challenging times, even many highly developed economies are severely constrained by their debt, finding themselves in a reactive position without adequate buffers. This is what the Swiss government wants to avoid for Switzerland. The importance of the ability to act in an interconnected world was demonstrated about a year ago. Following a series of bad decisions taken by its management, a Swiss bank of global systemic importance experienced a serious crisis of confidence, which required swift public intervention. A solution was found in the public interest to avoid a financial crisis that would have weighed heavily on the entire Swiss economy and thus Swiss citizens and taxpayers, and that would have rippled outward internationally. As you know, government actions didn't stop there. The failure of Credit Suisse raised many issues, both nationally and internationally. We therefore thoroughly analysed the existing too-big-to-fail framework and the lessons learned from the crisis, and this resulted in a broad action plan to fill the gaps we detected. In an interconnected world, this endeavour cannot stop at the Swiss borders. In order to make the resolution of a global systemically important bank not only theoretically possible, but also credible and viable, we will have to work together in order to address and reduce the related risks. In addition to the work planned at national level, we are therefore also engaging in the relevant international fora, in particularly the Financial Stability Board, so that the framework can be strengthened at the global level as well. That brings me back to multilateralism. We are not naive. Multilateral institutions and fora are facing major challenges. In times like these, with free trade under pressure through growing protectionism, with governments under pressure through high levels of debts but increasing spending needs, with liberal democracies under pressure through populism, disinformation, and authoritarianism promising simple answers to complex questions, we shouldn't content ourselves with blind optimism, but not with fatalism either. It's my firm belief that multilateralism is not merely idealistic. It is the most effective way of defending the interests of our citizens. Recently, the historian Lorraine Daston said in an interview with NZZ Geschichte that there is no culture without rules. Rules, she said, bring predictability. And predictability, I might add, brings trust. Defending and engaging in multilateralism means defending a rules-based order and therefore contributing to the preservation and enhancement of certainty and trust. In the end, the best rules are those that apply to everyone, while fragmentation increases complexity, drives up costs, and potentially worsens the effect of scarcity. Well, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, we need to lead by example, and we need to lead with the next generation in mind, accepting the potential for episodes of scarcity in its various dimensions and letting our policies, both domestically and internationally, guided by this reality are unavoidable. This does not necessarily mean that we are facing a future of declining well-being. It means that we have to preserve our resilience, and in order to do so, we not only have to defend a multilateral rules-based order, we also have to do the work at home, not only defending, but cherishing our liberal and democratic rules and values, preserve the rule of law, preserve our institutions, our openness, and contribute to a constructive and solution-oriented political culture, to the sustainable use of our limited resources, And we also have to contribute to a sound fiscal policy. This is the basis for our shared wealth and for the prosperity of future generations. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you, dear Finance Minister. Thank you very much for your speech. Thank you for your committed plea also in favor of liberal democracy and open markets. Let's start right away with democracy, free trade and multilateralism. You were at the spring meeting of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and World Bank in Washington a few days ago. When you look back, how much of this multilateralism did you really feel there?
Well, thank you. This is a good question. I think that multilateralism is unavoidable for a country like Switzerland. We are not a political superpower, but we are a small country, but an important economy. And so it is very important to us to have access to the G20 that also had its plenary sessions at the same time, to the IMF and the World Bank. But of course, the international multilateral organizations are under strain. There is protectionism coming up. And what we also witness, and this is really strange, especially in the IMF, is that the IMF is not able anymore to release a common press release, a common statement, because of the war in Ukraine. And you cannot imagine, I mean, the chair of the IMF committee, Mohammed Al-Chadhan, the finance minister of Saudi Arabia, I think he has been negotiating for 2 or 3 days to have a common press release, which was not possible. And I think this is a bad development because the IMF, of course, is affected by geopolitical developments, but should not be affected in that manner because the core business of the IMF is financial stability.
But it's not just the IMF. If you look at the UN, is also acting helplessly.
This is more political. Yeah, well, I think that the IMF is really committed to sound fiscal policy, financial stability, and as I said, it has become very difficult. But I think, there is no alternative to that, because Switzerland really has to have the possibility to attend these meetings. And I always speak in the plenary sessions. I'm, as a chair of a constituency of the IMF, I can also attend the IMF committee. This is very important to also express Switzerland views in the plenary.
Okay, if you don't take the UN, you can also take the World Trade Organization. The World Trade Organization is blocked as well. You just mentioned the IMF. What do you think are the days of major international institutions and multilateralism? Are they over?
No, they're not over. What we also witness is that, for instance, with the G20 plenary, maybe there is a certain shift in the sense of that during the plenary sessions of the G20 where we can participate yes. Because we are a strong economy. There are decisions that are shaped in a certain way for the OECD, for the IMF, for the World Bank, for other institutions. So it is not over. And I think that smaller countries with a strong economy really have an interest the multilateral organizations remain effective. Mm-hmm. Because otherwise, we're not naive. Even in multilateral organizations, look at the OECD with the minimum tax we had to introduce. We know that the important countries, the superpowers dominate. Well, then they don't comply, but that's another story. Mm. But they determine mm-hmm. the framework and then they say goodbye. Mm. But but still, we have for Switzerland, it is very important also to be in touch, to have bilateral meetings, because the plenary is one thing. What is even more important are the bilateral meetings I could have also in Washington.
But you mentioned the G20, and I guess Brazil is leading the G20, and it hasn't become easier with Brazil.
Are there any Brazilians? Well,
we are off the record. It's an off-the-record talk.
Well, strictly just Chatham House rules. Well, now it has become quite difficult because they have another agenda. They have elections in Brazil. And I was in Brazil in February, also at the G20 meeting in Sao Paulo. And there, Minister Haddad announced that there should be a third pillar in the OECD tax framework to tax the rich worldwide. And, well, that, of course, is not really good news because, I mean, we have not even implemented Pillar 1 has not even been decided on. And we're implementing Pillar 2. And I feel, well, there is quite I would say, a division between the global south and the Western nations. They have another agenda. They have organized themselves more efficiently. By the way, Brazil was supported in Washington by France because France has an enormous debt level. I think they have to service debts of about 50 billion. This is about the amount they spend for defense. But finally, I don't think that this will have be successful. But it's a politically, I would say, a political agenda also of the government of Brazil.
Okay, from Brazil to Switzerland, you mentioned the strengths of Switzerland. What can a small country like Switzerland do, which relies on free trade and a stable international financial system? You mentioned a strong state. I found it quite impressive. You're a liberal. Should the state even be stronger, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, I would say, give you the answer that Switzerland shouldn't make the same mistakes as all the others do.
Which mistakes?
For instance, debt. Well, you just mentioned, now that I said a strong state, when I advocate for a strong state, I mean that we have to have a sound fiscal and budgetary policy and discipline, because this is what makes a government and a state strong. A state must be able to act in a crisis. We were able to act during the pandemic. We were able to act during the war in Ukraine to host a lot of Ukrainian refugees.
But it's easier as a small country.
No, it is not easy. It's just a question of discipline. And, I think it's also a question of political culture and common sense. Some people sometimes forget that common sense is not a bad principle in politics.
Yes. Good point. Thank you. I'm right with this point. Well, just one last question before we open the discussion. Talking about resources and scarcity, you mentioned some of them. You didn't mention education. How important is education for Switzerland? We are talking at the university.
Well, education is very important, and I think that we really have a very qualified workforce in Switzerland. This, of course, is due to the high quality of education in universities, but also the education on a professional level, because we have the apprenticeship system in Switzerland, which is really, I would say, one of the pillars of the success of Switzerland's economy. And, well, education is important, as I said. Sound fiscal and budgetary policy is important. The openness of our markets, also, I would say, the network of free trade agreements. I have just talked to Brian because we signed last December a financial services agreement with UK. I think it is also a strength sometimes to be different, not to choose the beaten tracks. And I think this asks for some courage, because usually, policy or politics just likes to follow the mainstream, and the mainstream is not always what is right and good for a country.
Thank you, Karin Keller-Sutter. Well, thanks so far. So let's open up this discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carsten Spohr and George Mwanza. Well, Carsten Spohr has been CEO of the German airline Lufthansa for 10 years now. Lufthansa is the second largest airline in Europe with over 100,000 employees, I guess. Yeah. And George Mwanza is the youngest mayor in Africa. He was elected mayor of Chipata in Zambia in 2021 as an independent candidate, 29 years old. I'm very... It's great to have you both here. Well, let's start with Carsten Spohr. We were just talking about Switzerland, so let's talk about Germany, which some people are once again calling the sick man of Europe. I am not just thinking of the economic weakness, energy crisis, and inflation. I'm also thinking of the shortage of skilled labor and the increasing willingness to go on strike. Lufthansa is also affected by this. So what is wrong in Germany?
I was glad to leave Germany for a day to go to Switzerland, and now
well, I went to Germany,
now you start in that fashion. That's why I need to correct you first of all. Lufthansa is a European airline group, and there's even a nice airline in Switzerland which is part of us. And we wouldn't be the Lufthansa Group as we are without Swiss, for example. But it's also true for Austrian Airlines, for Brussels. And if things go right in Brussels, hopefully soon Italy will join our group as well. There is no way to play in the global league as the only German company anymore. So I take those German issues very seriously, and I will answer your questions. But let's be honest, to answer challenges in the global scheme, be it political, as you rightly said, or be it also as a global player in the industry or any industry, you need to have more than national answers. Okay, so but nevertheless, of course, Germany is our biggest place of operation.
Well, the group is bigger.
So I do take this issues very seriously. I think Germany has probably too often thought that the answer to scarcity is degrowth. That doesn't work. The only answer to scarcity is growth. Degrowth is a very selfish attitude of some parts of the world which don't help in Africa, which don't help in Latin America, which don't help even in Europe, in my view. But that could be argued by some, but surely for the global challenges, we need to be going back to growth. And growth in Germany means sometimes discipline. I loved your speech. Too bad you already have a job. I would have another job for you across the border, Mrs. Mrs. Keller-Sutter. So discipline. Working more is one way to overcome scarcity, which surely we in Germany need to do. The number of working hours compared to Switzerland already is way too low. Don't even compare to other parts of the world. The government, strong government, I agree with, it needs to focus on priorities of government, which I think is security, infrastructure, and education. Their government should be strong, including a strong fiscal system. And then I think the economy should use its forces to develop a place or a country further. And that also in Germany, entrepreneurship has not always been encouraged in all parts of the industry lately. And all that needs to work in a global competitive environment. There's a level playing field needed. And in Germany, in some industries, unfortunately, also the one I'm representing, we moved away from that level playing field. That, of course, in the end, then doesn't allow you to compete on a global scale the way you could. So I'm not so negative as some. because I think also for all the young people in the room, surely, I like that letter the first young lady has written to herself. I wish I could answer you the letter. It's probably inappropriate. I won't. But if I could answer you in one word, it's optimism. The world needs optimism to overcome all the challenges there are. And if the young generation doesn't have optimism, so take those challenges seriously, but answer in a positive way, which in many ways, driven by optimism, includes technology, includes efficiency, which has always been the answer to scarcity. And Switzerland is not a bad place to learn that. So you picked a pretty good university, I think.
So we need optimism, we need growth. When I look at Lufthansa has a capacity growth, and the Lufthansa Group revenue is expected to rise significantly. Well, if you look at your employees, they don't want to work more. Most or part of them, they want to work less. They want to also have higher wages. So what's the problem? Why don't you pay them just higher wages?
Well, actually, we do. We are the airline group in Europe paying the highest wages and having the least working hours. So I think we are probably the most attractive employer in the industry. We get 20 applications for every job. Not all from St. Gallen, but some even from St. Gallen. So I think the attractiveness is there. We are hiring about 26,000 people this year and last year. So every month we hire 1,300 new people.
But part of them go on strike.
Well, because in Germany, you are at full employment. At the same time, you have high inflation. My university days are a few years behind, but there used to be the Phillips curve. And my professors told me that high inflation and full employment don't match on the Phillips curve, if I remember correctly. So there's a unique window right now, I think, for, to be honest, unions to take advantage of that unusual situation of full employment and high inflation. I think that was driving strike behavior in Germany, not just in Lufthansa, but in Germany in particular. But overall, in the end, we compete with others for talent. Scarcity of talent is a global issue, and you need to be an attractive employer to overcome that. We are, and that's why we are finding 1,300 people every month to grow even larger. Even in Switzerland, as a smaller place, we hire 1,800 people just this year for Swiss, which is an unheard number for an airline the size of Swiss.
Mr. Mwanza, a shortage of skilled labor, an aging workforce, you can probably only laugh about such European shortage problems in Africa. No? Mr. Mwanza?
Sorry.
No problem at all. No.
The English is so different. So I want to. I'm an African politician, and my name is George Mwanza. I got elected at 27 years old. It was very difficult to win an election, I must say. And my role here is to talk politics and leadership scarcity, as you did indicate. So, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I must say that the African youth are resilient, and they would like to register their voice on the stage. That indeed we are home to most natural resources, but we have one big problem: the leadership scarcity. And I must say that most of young people are from Africa and from the global south are cowards. They don't want to take the courage to confront leadership scarcity. And I think that's a very, very important issue that we must confront here. So I must say that with a population of over 1.4 billion young Africans and Africa in general, we have very young people in political leadership, but also confronting scarcities. We are seriously burdened by debt, for example, in most African countries, and that's a big problem, because we now have to look for resources to invest in infrastructure and the potential of young people. And that is a big problem. But also to remind you that in 1835, people met in Berlin here in Germany to partition Africa in small pieces of countries, really. But now it's so difficult to move from one country to the other, and that limits the potential of my fellow African young people in business growth, as you said, but also to make sure that we are able to get the right skills of the young people. So I wanted to make mention that leadership scarcity is something that we are seriously confronting as African young people. And that is the reason why I ran for a position of mayor, to join the elders and everybody else on the table of decision making, so that we are able to protect our natural resources and be able to administer limited resources seriously, so to make a change in our country.
And what do you do to fight leadership scarcity?
Well, so the most important thing is that we are running for public office. So the first stage was to win an election, which was, of course, very, very difficult. And I must say that engineers that are here, I've met scientists and various other great young people here. We need to not shy away from politics. In Africa, politics runs everything. It tells you what to eat, how you think, either you're a professor in mining or whatever you are. You must make sure that you really, really somehow get to make sure that you prioritize political dominance. I think that's very, very important. So I invite, what we are doing right now is to just make sure that a lot of young people are actively getting engaged in political decision making. So for example, in my city, where I'm mayor, for a very long time, I think people didn't have access to water, clean and safe drinking water. And my own mother was a marketeer. She used to sell at the market, and she didn't have clean and safe drinking water. And they were paying levy every day to the municipalities. And this is a situation everywhere. But no improvement was actually being done. So we had to grab the political power, and now we are able to provide clean and safe drinking water. I've actually built a very modern public ablution block for over 50 years that was not there, and yet they were collecting. So basically what we are saying is that we need to actively participate in politics as young Africans and make sure that we provide leadership.
Zambia may have a scarcity in leadership, but Zambia has a large copper reserves. It also is also considered a huge. You mentioned the water reservoir, and the population is young, so you have quite a lot to offer. Nevertheless, poverty is widespread in Zambia. Why isn't the country and the politicians there, maybe the older ones, doing a better job of using its resources for the benefit of all?
Well, I must say that, yes, we have abundant water in Zambia, very true, but there are limitations, really. There's infrastructure limitations, as I said. Zambia is, just like other many African countries, debt-ridden because of poor decision from those that were there before the youth leadership, really. So debt has brought serious limitation in investing in water infrastructure in terms of storage facilities, distribution infrastructure, and many others. But also, talking about copper, yes, we are the second producer of copper in Africa, and probably the 9th in the world, with 6% total world copper deposits, yes. But we have a challenge around the same, and that is the reason why we are coming in leadership, so that we are able to make decisions that are win-win, really, to benefit the immediate community as well as the multinational companies. So what the situation we have now is that around copper, which is a big resource, and the transitioning of now electric cars and many other need for copper, we have a challenge around multinational companies because of poor policies, really, which we are moving forward to address. But then because of poor policies, we are now having a challenge where there's too much price transfer pricing, I must say. So where a multinational company has another company in another country, and they pretend to buy copper at a low price, probably denying the country from the much needed taxation and resources which could be used to improve the connectivity infrastructure, to improve the potential of the young people, but also the resources that would be used to really improve the potential of young people, build infrastructure in water distribution, in storage, and ensure that we are able to give our people the quality. So we are confronting these issues to examine the taxation system so that we have a win-win. And that is why we come in as young leaders, so that we examine the existing policies that are there, and also bring about new policies that are going to benefit the immediate community, give us the necessary resources to invest in infrastructure. But also, we want to take out political interference, where when you want to bring about good mining taxation structures, and then they sponsor a coup against you. We don't want stories that are happening in Congo, in Niger, and as young people of Africa, we are following close developments in that regard, so that we make sure that amid this scarcity and amid this the presence of natural resources, important natural resources like copper, we have functional policies that protect depletion of resources, but also that benefits the local community in terms of resources, proper mining taxation. And therefore, I met most of my friends here that are interested in investing in natural resources like copper, really to think of investing in Africa, in Zambia, so that we can together work on how to improve.
Okay, let's stop at this point. Mr. Spohr, are you already offer flights to Zambia? So that you
With our partners, we do, not directly, because scarcity. We are short of airplanes.
Okay.
We are short of slots in Zurich-Kloten. So scarcity is a big part of my business. We cover 300 destinations around the world, but Zambia is not there yet. But
maybe
I'm sure
after
with
these
the
2
development
days
of leaders like you, we'll drop New York and we go to Zambia.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, but let's go back to Karin Keller-Sutter. The federal administration is also struggling with aging. We have talking about scarcity concerning labor. Many employees will be retiring in the next few years, especially the management team, I've learned. What goes through your mind when you listen to this young fellow, George Mwanza, this young politician from Africa?
Well, in fact, we have opposite problems. I mean, you have a very young generation. You have to offer work to, and we have a generation that is aging, and as you pointed out correctly, this is one of the concerns of the administration, not only administration, but the whole economy in Switzerland and also in other Western countries, that there is, the baby boom generation that will retire soon, and it is difficult to replace them. On the one hand, because we don't have enough young people, and on the other hand, because we are short of qualified workforce. So we also depend on immigration. This is why we also have the free movement of workers with the European Union, the bilateral treaty, which is very important to Switzerland, because this really gives the possibility to recruit qualified labor force also abroad. Yeah. But this is quite a different problem. You're lucky to have young people. Absolutely. It's good to have a young country, because there is a lot of innovation, a lot of strength in it, and but this is in fact also a source of migration, because many youngsters from Africa migrate to Europe because they feel they have a better future, and very often they are disappointed.
But instead of looking together to opportunities of increased cooperation, we only focus on the problems of migration, especially here in Europe. Don't you think so? How can we get out of it?
Africa has everything, really. We need to leverage on global networking and address issues of migration together. And we would like to encourage the African young population to move, really. Firstly, within Africa, it's very, very difficult. There are enough opportunities within Africa. Zambia has copper, for example. Botswana has diamonds. And more often, we need skilled young people that can be able to fill up the gaps to make sure that there's sustained growth. So before the young people of Africa look up to Europe, we must address the issues of movement limitation within Africa, really. And that is the reason why, as young people in local government, we are pushing so hard the African Union to address issues of the free movement of the African population, to leverage its global advantage of being a youthful population. But this is an issue that would really reduce the conflicts of young people coming to Europe, getting disappointed, or this and that. But with also technology available, we are able to learn from each other. But there is enough potential for the young people of Africa to move from one place to the other and be able to get to find what they are looking for. Enough potential, really. But as things stand, we have a lot of work to do, and that is the reason why, as young people that really wants to look for entrepreneurial opportunities, decent job, from moving from Zambia to Rwanda to the DRC, we are working very hard to push the African Union to effect the free movement of the African community, really.
Well, finally, let's talk about protection of natural resources and climate change. We haven't talked about it yet. Carsten Spohr, you just mentioned it. Lufthansa is facing huge investments in more environmental friendly aircraft. When will Lufthansa make progress on this? I guess other airlines are a little bit ahead.
No. We are currently the leader around the world with 0.2% of our fuel being sustainable aviation fuel, which is the answer for aviation, which is top of the industry. Also because of European blending mandates, we need to be there. We're receiving a new airplane every 3 weeks, and every new airplane is driving down CO2 consumption by 25 to 30%. And that's another example of what I said before, the answer not only to scarcity, but also the answer to our global sustainability challenges is technology. And of course, being able to innovate and invest into technology. Aviation has quadrupled in the last 30 years. At the same time, the CO2 emission per passenger has come down to half. Still means there's more CO2 emissions around the world, because aviation is one of the fastest growing industries, especially to Africa, by the way. The fastest growing market in the world is Africa. So we need to be able to use technology and, of course, also develop new technologies to bring it down to eventually to zero. By 2050, we want to be net zero. By 2030, we want to halve, and Lufthansa surely leads the way there compared to others. But in the end, the answer cannot be degrowth. The answer must be technology and allocating resources around the world in the most effective way, which has always been the answer of universities like St. Gallen to scarcity.
But in your opinion, is flying still too cheap?
Well, I think it was too cheap before COVID, and I said that publicly. So Swiss and Lufthansa have always been working against this craziness of €9 tickets. It was terrible for the environment. I think it's also sending the wrong signal toward labor that service is not worth more. Now with the scarcity of airplanes, I think we have found different pricing levels, which also now some complain about, to be honest. But I think we now have reached a level where flying is still available to the public. We don't want flying to be just for the rich again, which it was in the 60s and 70s and early 80s. I think we wanted to make it available not only in Europe, but also other parts of the world to the big part of the population. But that can only work with technology to reduce the imprint in terms of CO2, for sure.
Thank you. I think we are running out of time. As the St. Gallen Symposium has always been a place of exchange between the different worlds and also young and a little bit older generations. I would like to close with you, Mr. Mwanza. Last question: what do you like to pass on to us older people here in old Europe? What can we learn from you and your country?
Well, so much to learn from me, really, that my story in a typical African political scene, it's not very common to have young people win an election. Really, it's very difficult. Politics is highly commercialized and dominated by the old that have been there. But now this opens up a window of a world of opportunities to the young people to also passionately take a lead and provide leadership in their various communities. We have the energy, and we are the right people to confront scarcities of our time, and of course learning from the older generation and networking using the available platforms, really. So to my fellow young people, let's have the courage and let our passion drive ourselves to provide leadership in our communities, which is not so easy, of course. But Africa requires youthful leadership that is going to rethink the way forward and unlock the various limitations of movements from one area to the other, but also leverage on the energy that we have and our population to elect ourselves in leadership and participate in the animal code politics that probably drives everything in Africa, that it drives the bridging of the gap in skills mismatch, in protecting natural resources, and taking our people out of poverty, really. So much to learn from each other. But also, I've met very, very incredible young people here. I think that with the knowledge that we have and the smartness, and if we take away the cowardness, we probably have the courage, we'll be able to make the world better. Thank you.
Thank you. Karin Keller-Sutter, George Mwanza, and Carsten Spohr. Thanks a lot for this discussion. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a little break now, a coffee break and a networking break, and the symposium continues at 11 a.m. So see you soon.